I handled it pretty well. You know, I don't think I would handle it as well now because I have a deeper appreciation of what he was and what all those people were. I mean, these were cats that invented it. I mean, they weren't somebody who's just saying, oh, I decided I like blues and I'm going to learn to play it. These guys made it up from, from the beginning. But I don't think I quite appreciated that at the time. But I was excited, so I was determined to sit and watch them and drink just like them, which, later on became something of a burden that I had to get rid of, but it was amazing, and people always have these stories about how these guys would try to hide what they were doing on the guitar and this, that, and the other, and I didn't find any of that. They were as generous and as open as anybody you'd ever hope to meet.
Do you remember what kind of guitar Sunhouse was playing?
It was a steel body National of some sort. It was a resonator guitar. I'm not sure which. Wasn't into the models or anything. It may not even been a National. It may have been a Dobro or I don't know what make it was, but it was one that you could hit somebody over the head with and they'd remember it. Heavy as all get out. I saw him mostly at festivals. I saw him once at the Jazz Workshop in Boston. I saw him once at Club 47. It would be pretty standard. Most of those guys didn't really like just playing like 2 45-minute sets or one whatever. I mean, that's not how they were raised to play. I mean, they just sort of played all night. And they would stop and somebody else would play for a little while. And so it was a little artificially structured for them, but most of them picked up on it pretty quickly, but it was, there was usually somebody worried about whether they should actually go out and get that other bottle of whiskey for them or if they were going to make it through the night or something like that. That's all stuff that I remember in retrospect, but what I remember most is most of these guys were staying with fans, people who would put them up, they had a spare room and they would go over and there'd always be a party after the gig, and if you were lucky enough and knew the right people, you'd be there. Yeah. And many times, Reverend Gary Davis he hardly ever went to bed, he'd just sit up in an armchair all night. He'd have a little bottle of whiskey that he would nip from once in a while. He'd have that big J200 in his lap, and all us kids, we'd be sitting around and drinking beer and smoking pot and playing guitars. And every once in a while, he'd just wake up and look around. And he always had that cigar stub sticking out of his mouth. And he'd, like that, everybody'd stop. And then he'd sing a song. I mean, he'd just go into a song, and it was like he knew what was expected of him. Oh, it's my turn, and he would play, and then he'd say something, and he would be pretty unintelligible by that time, except when he was singing, because we all knew the songs, but then he would just lean back. He'd doze off again. Then his wife would come out and say, "Reverend, are you coming to bed?" "I'll be later, woman."
I'll listen to like Cincinnati Slow Rag, and you hear it, but then you try to play something like that, and there's so much happening there.
Yeah.
And it's so advanced. Did he seem like he was just like a whole different level guitar player than a lot of those cats?
He was a stickler. He was one of the few guys of all those guys that actually understood what he was doing. Could actually sort of put it into words. And it might not be the words you and I would use, but he made a pretty good percentage of his living from teaching, And I know that Roy Bookbinder, for instance, spent a lot of time with him and traveled with him and learned a lot from him. And he was a pretty strict taskmaster, He'd be after you until you got it right. And he would explain what was going on. Again, as I say, the terms of his explanation might not have been as clear as you would like, but he wanted you to do it the way he did it. You know, he didn't want you to go interpreting.
Wasn't he learning from piano players and trying to do that on guitar?
You might know more about that than I do.
I don't know.
You know, I do know Skip James, who also played piano. He would go back and forth. He was always doing guitar licks on piano and piano licks on guitar. He would go back and forth between the two. A very distinctive style. I think that's probably what made him unique in the way that he was.
I don't know very many people who were like there around these original cats.
Right.
And you were, and I don't even know the questions to ask you to get you to talk
I didn't
about
either.
it.
I didn't either. You know, that's one of the that's a little bit of a regret that I have, that I just didn't know how lucky I was at the time to be hanging around with these guys. But
These are the architects.
yeah,
Of
exactly.
everything that came afterwards.
Right. Yeah. On the other hand, or not on the other hand, but another way of looking at it is they were just guys, you know, just like you and me. They're just trying to make a living and playing music, hoping they can say something that pleases them and pleases other people enough that they'll pay them to do it.
It's kind of, I was going to ask, were they held in any esteem by?
Well, they certainly were by us. Yeah, I mean, we were kind of in awe, you know. And at the same time, it was interesting because you'd have to be pretty thick not to realize the cultural gulf that was between us. You know, we looked at them somewhat awestruck, happy to be there and learn from them, but at the same time vaguely aware that there was a chasm in between our lives and their lives, and what their reality was and what ours was, you know. And I know in retrospect that I would spend a lot of time just hoping I didn't put my foot in my mouth some way, because I just didn't know what I was doing, because I was just some dumb kid, you know.
And you come from a certain level of privilege.
Exactly.
And they come from a completely different background.
Yeah. And yet, in another context, they were on a pedestal and I was below them, you know, looking up, trying to learn, you know, which now is called cultural appropriation, but I didn't think about it that way. I just wanted to know.
Swindlers and blues leagues.
That's right. That's right.
Did you ever cross paths with Leyton Hopkins?
He was the one that I never met. And he was an early influence on me. In fact, he was the first. When I was 17, I went to Mexico City for my first year of college. I was going to be an anthropologist in real life. But I was playing guitar, and I had a roommate in Mexico City from Texas, and he was totally into my rudimentary playing and the people that I was listening to, and he handed me this record. He said, "You should listen to this guy." And it was a Prestige Bluesville record, and it was Leyton Hopkins, Blues in My Bottle. And I was hooked. I couldn't believe it. I thought there were 2 or 3 guys playing in the first place, because I didn't know anything about, you know, finger picking. I was basically, at that point, still a 3-chord thump and bash guy, you know. Strum. And I think I said to Tom Whitten was his name, my roommate. I said, "Which one of these guys I'm supposed to listen to?" He said, "There's only one guy playing." You know? I did see John Hurt. I saw him several times. The first time was again while I was still in college, and I was still trying to be an anthropologist, and I was on my way to France, and for a year, my 3rd year of school. And I had to go to New York to catch the boat. We still went to Europe on a steamship in those days, the SS United States. And this friend of mine at school at Tulane lived in Yonkers, you know, just outside of New York. And he says, "Why don't you come a couple of days early? You know, have you ever been to New York?" And I said, "Well, not really." And he said, "Come on, we'll see if..." And he wasn't really into my kind of music at all, but he knew that I was, and he knew that there were places to see people in New York. So he says, why don't you come? You can stay with me for a couple of days before your ship sails, and we can catch some music. Well, I was all about that, so I went, and I got to his house. He picked me up, I think, at the airport or train station. I forget how I got there even. And he said, "Oh, I got the I got the voice here. Let's see what's going on." And he opens up the paper, and he says, "The Gaslight. You ever hear of the Gaslight?" I said, "Yeah, I have." And he says, "There's somebody there tonight." He says, "Mississippi John." And I said, "Mississippi John? Are you kidding me?" You know, I said, "We got to go. Come on." So we went down. I think it cost us $3 to get in, which was a lot of money. We're talking 1964. You know, so we got down there, and I remember it was in a basement. You know, the Gaslight was in a basement in the village, and I'm sitting there. This kid comes out on stage in a Madras shirt with a big Guild guitar. And I didn't know about opening acts. I didn't know anything about this scene. All I knew was my hero was supposed to play, you know. And so this kid plays a song, and then he plays another one. It was all right, you know, but... So there's this real hip-looking guy sitting at a table next to me, you know. And so I said, "Who is that?" You know. And he gave me this look like, "You shitting me?" And I go, "No, I mean, like, who is it?" And he says, "It's Tom Paxton." And I go, "What do I know from Tom Paxton?" I don't know, you know. So I sat there and I listened to another song, and then I see, coming from behind the stage, he was unmistakable, and he had the same hat on that I'd seen him in pictures from Newport, you know. It was John Hurt, you know. And he comes around, and he sits at my table right behind me, you know, watching Tom Paxton, you know. So I was so thrilled, you know. I turned around, I was going to say something to him, and he shushed me. He goes, 50 years later, I got around to telling Tom that story, you know. I saw you, he said you were opening for John Hurt in 1964 at the Gaslight, and I just wanted you to know that he shushed me in favor of you. Tom looks at me, he says, "Damn straight, I hope you took it to heart." So then, I mean, I'll never forget this night. It's indelible, you know. So then after John Hurt comes up, after Tom finishes his set, and John Hurt gets up there, and I'm in heaven, you know, and he plays 2 or 3 songs. And then this kid shows up with a harmonica and starts playing with him. Well, I was annoyed because I was trying to listen. I didn't know how to separate, you know, sounds at that time. I was not a sophisticated listener. And, you know, so I just wanted to listen to John Hurt, and the harp was getting in the way, I thought, you know. But I didn't want to see dumb or anything, so I turned to that same hipster that I'd asked about Tom Paxton. I said, "Who's that playing harmonica?" And he looks at me again like, "Are you sure?" I said, "No, who is it?" You know, he says, "That's John Sebastian." So what do I know from John Sebastian? Nothing, you know. And like 3 years later, I was on the Jersey Turnpike, and I hear, "Hot town, summer in the city, back of my neck." Yeah, and I told, I wasn't that long ago, 4 or 5 months ago, I told that story to John Sebastian. And he stopped me. We were all backstage with Happy Traum and Cindy Cash Dollar and some people doing this show in Woodstock. He says, "I've got living proof. I've got living proof that I played with John Hurt." It's fun.